The year was 1908, and the air in Pittsburgh was thick, not just with the soot of the world's greatest steel mills, but with the heavy electric tension of the Gilded Age. A 25-year-old journalist named Napoleon Hill stepped off a streetcar, clutching a battered notebook and a letter of introduction. He looked like any other hungry writer of the era, thin, slightly anxious, but possessed by a desperate ambition to escape the poverty of the Appalachian Hills. He was there to interview Andrew Carnegie, the richest man on the planet. In a Pixar-style reimagining, the scene is bathed in a cinematic, golden hour glow. The Carnegie Mansion is an architectural titan, its marble floors polished to a mirror shine that reflects Hill's scuffed shoes. As Hill is ushered into the great library, the scale of the room dwarfs him. Towering shelves of mahogany hold the collective wisdom of centuries, and at the far end, behind a desk that looks like it was carved from the hull of a battleship, sits the Steel King himself. Andrew Carnegie was not a large man in stature, but in this room, he radiates a gravitational pull. He isn't interested in a standard interview about steel production or railroads. He's looking for a vessel, a mind he can mold to carry out a legacy far more valuable than gold. "Young man," Carnegie says, his voice a gravelly Scottish burr. "The world is filled with people who work themselves to death for pennies, while a tiny few seem to have the Midas touch. Do you know why?" Hill stammers, mentioning luck, hard work, and capital. Carnegie shakes his head, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Luck is for the lazy. Hard work is for those who don't know where they're going. The difference is a formula, a philosophy of success that I have used to build empires. But I am an old man. I don't have the time to organize it. I need a man who is willing to spend the next 20 years of his life investigating the minds of the successful to prove this law exists." The camera zooms in on Hill. This is the inciting incident. The Pixar-style animation captures the sweat on his brow, the dilation of his pupils. He realizes he's standing at a crossroads. Carnegie reaches into his pocket and pulls out a stopwatch. He places it on the desk. The ticking echoes through the silent library like a heartbeat. "I will give you 3 minutes to decide," Carnegie says, "but there is one condition. I will not pay you a single cent for your time. I will provide you with letters of introduction to the most powerful men in America. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell. But your expenses, your travel, and your livelihood must be earned by your own wit. You will be your own first experiment." This is the high-stakes hook. The audience feels the weight of the choice. To say yes is to sign away 2 decades of his youth for a promise of knowledge that might be a delusion. To say no is to return to a life of mediocrity, writing fluff pieces for local rags. Hill's mind races. He thinks of the Virginia mountains, the dirt floors, and the revolver he used to carry. He thinks of his stepmother's belief in him. He realizes that if he refuses, he will spend the rest of his life wondering, what if? The ticking of the watch grows louder in the sound design. 29 seconds pass, 45. Hill's knuckles whiten as he grips his notebook. "I'll do it," Hill says, his voice cracking slightly but gaining strength. "I will accept the challenge, and I will finish it." Carnegie smiles. Not the smile of a businessman closing a deal, but that of a mentor who has found his apprentice. He stops the watch at 29 seconds. "Good," Carnegie says, leaning back. "If it had taken you a second over 60, I would have known you lacked the definiteness of purpose required to see this through. Most men spend their lives waiting for the perfect time to act. There is no perfect time. There is only the decision and the will to follow through. This moment is the big bang of the self-help movement." Carnegie hands Hill a list of names, a who's who of the 20th century. But more importantly, he hands him a mindset. He tells Hill that he will encounter failure, ridicule, and poverty along the way. He warns him that the world hates a man with a plan. As Hill exits the mansion, the warm gold of the interior shifts to the cold blue-gray of the Pittsburgh evening. The reality of his situation sinks in. He has no money, no guarantee of success, and a 20-year task ahead of him. But as the camera pans up to the smog-filled sky, we see a spark in his eyes that wasn't there before. He isn't just a journalist anymore. He's a man on a mission. But as Hill reached out to the first name on Carnegie's list, the legendary Henry Ford, he realized that getting an audience with a titan was the easy part. Survival was going to be the real test. To understand the man who would eventually sit in the boardrooms of titans, we have to look at where the iron was forged. We transition from the golden marble of Carnegie's library to the rugged, jagged edges of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Wise County, Virginia. In our Pixar-style world, the palette shifts. The refined golds are replaced by earthy browns, deep the forest greens, and the harsh, slate gray of mountain stone. This is 1892, and the world of Napoleon Hill is small, violent, and desperately poor. The camera opens on a 9-year-old Napoleon. He isn't the polished man in the suit we saw in Chapter 1. He is a scruffy, barefoot kid with a defiant glint in his eyes. In this world, survival isn't about mindset. It's about muscle. Napoleon was what the locals called a hellraiser. By age 9, he had already developed a reputation for being the most troublesome boy in the county. He carried a small, rusted revolver tucked into his waistband, not for protection, but for the sheer, rebellious thrill of it. The animation captures his environment: a one-room log cabin, smoke billowing from a crooked chimney, and the ever-present shadow of the poverty ghost. His mother had died when he was only 9, leaving a void that he filled with anger. His father, James Hill, was a man overwhelmed by the harshness of mountain life, unable to tame the wild spirit of his son. The turning point? Enter the stepmother. One afternoon, a carriage pulls up to the cabin. Out steps Martha, Napoleon's new stepmother. In the cinematic language of our film, Martha is a beacon of order in a world of chaos. She wears a clean, sharp dress and carries herself with a dignity that the mountain had never seen. Napoleon's father introduces her to the boy, leaning in to whisper a warning. "Martha, I hope you can do something with Napoleon. He's the meanest boy in these mountains. He'll probably have a rock in your face before tomorrow morning." The camera zooms in on the standoff. The meanest boy stares up at the refined woman. Napoleon expects a lecture or a belt. Instead, Martha does something that changes the trajectory of history. She reaches out, lifts his chin, and looks him directly in the eyes. "You're wrong, James," she says, her voice echoing with a calm authority. This is not a mean boy. He is a bright boy. He just hasn't found a purpose for his energy yet. That single sentence was the birth of the self-fulfilling prophecy, a concept Hill would later preach to millions. Martha saw a version of Napoleon that didn't exist yet, and by seeing it, she called it into being. She made him a deal. If he gave up the revolver, she would give him a typewriter. In 1890s rural Virginia, a typewriter was as alien as a spaceship. To Napoleon, it was a miracle of keys and hammers. Martha told him, "If you learn to use this, you can write your way out of these mountains. You can talk to the world." The animation shifts into a training montage. We see the seasons change through the cabin window. The revolver is buried in the dirt. The sound design replaces the bang of gunfire with the rhythmic, staccato click-clack of the typewriter keys. Napoleon isn't just learning to spell, he's learning to think. He begins writing for small-town newspapers, reporting on the very mountain brawls he used to start. By the age of 13, Napoleon Hill was the mountain reporter. He was earning money, but more importantly, he was earning a reputation. He realized that the pen, or in this case the Remington typewriter, was a tool of leverage. He discovered that he could influence how people saw their own community. However, the Appalachian underdog story wasn't just about success. It was about the first encounter with the villain of indecision. As he grew older, Napoleon felt the pull of the mountains trying to drag him back down. Local men laughed at his city boy machine. They told him he was acting above his station. This is where Hill learned the law of environment. He realized that if he stayed in the mountains, his burning desire would eventually be smothered by the damp fog of local skepticism. He needed a bigger stage. We close the chapter with a cinematic shot of a teenage Napoleon standing on a ridge, looking out toward the horizon where the mountain peaks end and the flatlands begin. He has his typewriter under one arm and a small bag of belongings in the other. He is leaving the only home he's ever known, fueled by the one thing Martha gave him, a belief that he was destined for more than the coal mines. But as Napoleon stepped out of the mountains and into the bustling world of the city, he quickly learned that wanting success was easy. The world, however, was about to demand a price he wasn't sure he could pay, and it would take a chance meeting with a titan of steel to show him the true cost of greatness. The air in the library of Andrew Carnegie's New York mansion was thick with the scent of leather and old money. Napoleon Hill sat on the edge of a velvet chair, his heart drumming against his ribs. He had the typewriter skills of a mountain reporter, but in the presence of the man who had personal control over the world's steel, he felt like a child playing with wooden blocks. This chapter is the test of the apprentice. In our Pixar-style animation, the lighting shifts from the dusty, earthy tones of the Virginia mountains to a sharp, high-contrast, corporate Gothic. The shadows are long, and Carnegie's silhouette is imposing, his white hair glowing like a halo of frosted silver. Carnegie didn't just want to tell Hill his life story. He wanted to see if Hill was a drifter or a driver. For the first 24 hours, Carnegie barely spoke of steel. Instead, he bombarded Hill with questions that felt like a mental autopsy. What is your definite major purpose? How do you handle a mind that refuses to obey your commands? Do you believe a man's environment is a cage or a springboard? The animation visualizes this as a chess match, but instead of pieces, Carnegie is moving glowing symbols of power and philosophy across the desk. Hill, sweating and frantic, tries to keep up. He realizes that Carnegie is looking for a specific type of intelligence, not the kind you get from books, but the kind you get from character. By the second night, Carnegie invited Hill to stay over. They sat by a fireplace that roared with a flame so orange it seemed to dance to the rhythm of Carnegie's voice. This is where the secret began to leak out. Carnegie leaned in, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. Hill, most people think I built these mills with my own two hands. They think I am a genius of engineering. I am not. I am a genius of people. I surround myself with men who know more than I do, and I harmonize their minds into one single giant brain. This was the first time Hill heard the term, the mastermind. To illustrate this, the screen should dissolve into a cinematic visual. We see 3 or 4 men sitting in a circle, and as they speak, golden threads of light emerge from their heads, weaving together in the center to form a glowing, translucent sun. This third mind represents the collective power that Carnegie used to dominate the industrial world. As the third day drew to a close, the atmosphere turned cold. The hospitality ended. Carnegie stood up and looked at his watch. This was the moment we glimpsed in Chapter 1, but now we see the internal struggle. Carnegie offered the contract, 20 years, 0 pay, only letters of introduction. I am giving you the keys to the kingdom, Carnegie said, but I'm not giving you the kingdom itself. You must build that with your own hands. If you fail, you will have wasted your life. If you succeed, you will have changed history. The camera focuses on Hill's eyes. We see a montage of his past. The meanest boy in the mountains, the typewriter Martha gave him, the poverty he left behind. The Pixar style allows us to see the fear of poverty as a literal shadow creeping toward him from the corners of the room. He had to make a choice. In his pocket, he had just enough money to get home. If he said yes, he would have to find a way to eat, sleep, and travel while working for a man who wouldn't give him a dime. "I'll do it," Hill whispered. Then louder, "I will do it, Mr. Carnegie." Carnegie smiled, a rare, genuine expression of approval. He reached into his desk and handed Hill a small leather-bound book. "This is not a gift of money," Carnegie said. "It is a list of 500 names: Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Theodore Roosevelt. These men don't know you yet, but they will, and through them, you will find the 13 steps to the top of the mountain." As Hill walked out of the mansion, the heavy iron gates clanging shut behind him, He realized he was the luckiest broke man in the world. He had no salary, but he had a map. But the map was written in a language Hill didn't yet understand. To decode it, he would have to face his first titan, a man named Henry Ford, who was so famously private and stubborn that he had already turned down a dozen biographers. Hill was about to learn that a letter from Carnegie was a key, but it wasn't a guarantee the door would stay open. The year was 1909, and the world was beginning to move at the speed of the internal combustion engine. Napoleon Hill stood outside the Paquette Avenue plant in Detroit, the smell of grease and hot iron stinging his nostrils. In his hand, he clutched the letter from Andrew Carnegie, his golden ticket. But as he watched the frantic motion of the Ford factory, he realized that a letter was just paper. The man inside, Henry Ford, was a man of steel and silence. In our Pixar-style visualization, this chapter moves from the quiet, mahogany stillness of Carnegie's library into the industrial chaos of the Ford factory. The colors are high contrast, fiery oranges from the furnaces and cold, oily blues from the machinery. The sound design is a symphony of hammers and hissing steam, a rhythm Ford called the Song of Progress. Henry Ford was not like Carnegie. Carnegie was a philosopher of wealth. Ford was a practitioner of efficiency. When Hill finally secured his meeting, he didn't find a man ready to chat. He found a man who looked at him as if he were a defect in a machine. "Mr. Carnegie says you're looking for a secret," Ford said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "But secrets aren't found in books, Hill. They're found in the doing. Most people are too busy thinking about being rich to actually do the work." This was Hill's first major lesson in specialized knowledge. Ford wasn't a man who knew everything. In fact, he famously had very little formal education. But he knew how to organize knowledge and apply it to a single purpose. As Hill followed Ford through the plant, the animation captures a stunning visual metaphor. We see the chaotic parts of a car, the chassis, the wheels, the engine, floating in mid-air. As Ford speaks, the parts begin to snap together in perfect, synchronized order. "I don't need to know how to build a tire," Ford told Hill. "I need to know how to find the man who builds the best tire and put him in the right place at the right time." Hill began to scribble furiously. This was the second pillar of his philosophy: organized planning. Success wasn't a stroke of genius, it was a factory line. You take a raw idea, move it through the stations of imagination and specialized knowledge, and at the end of the line, you have a result. During the interview, Ford told Hill the story of the V8 engine. Ford had commanded his engineers to build an engine with 8 cylinders in a single block. The engineers said it was impossible. "Produce it anyway," Ford had replied. 6 months went by, nothing. Another 6 months, still nothing. In the Pixar sequence, we see the engineers drooping with exhaustion, their shadows growing long and heavy. They represent the ghost of doubt. But Ford wouldn't budge. He had persistence, the 9th principle Hill would later immortalize. Finally, the impossible happened. The engine worked. "You see, Hill," Ford said, leaning over a prototype, "the mind can create what the hands cannot. Until the mind convinces the hands, it's possible." As Hill left Detroit, he realized something profound. Henry Ford was technically ignorant of many things. He didn't know history or high-level science, but he had mastered his own mind so completely that he could draw on the infinite intelligence of others. Hill sat on the train back from Detroit, his notebook overflowing. He realized that Carnegie's challenge wasn't just a research project. It was a transformation. He was no longer just a reporter. He was becoming the world's first success systems architect. He had the mastermind from Carnegie. He now had specialized knowledge and persistence from Ford. But a dark thought began to creep in, visualized as a cold, purple mist seeping into the train car. How was he going to pay for the next 19 years? Hill had the secrets of the Titans, but his own stomach was growling. He was about to enter his dark night of the soul, where he would have to decide if he would follow his own advice or become a drifter like the millions he was trying to save. By 1912, Napoleon Hill was no longer just a spectator. He was a man obsessed. He had the blueprints from Carnegie and the grit from Ford, but he was facing a cold, hard reality. The Appalachian underdog was broke. He was living in a cramped, drafty apartment, his typewriter keys clicking away late into the night while his stomach growled. In our Pixar-style visualization, this chapter introduces a shift in lighting. The industrial orange of the Ford factory fades into a deep midnight blue. We see Hill hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of notes, illuminated only by a flickering candle. This represents the Valley of Doubt. It was during this period of struggle that Hill hit a breakthrough. He went back to his notes on Carnegie and a new name on the list: Thomas Edison. He realized that none of these men worked in a vacuum. Edison didn't just invent the light bulb. He managed a laboratory of dozens of specialists. Hill realized that when two people sit down to solve a problem with a spirit of harmony, something supernatural happens. In the film, we visualize this through a mind sync sequence. We see Hill meeting with a small group of fellow writers and thinkers in a dimly lit basement. As they begin to brainstorm how Hill can fund his research, the animation shows thought tendrils rising from each person's head. Separately, these tendrils are weak and flickering, but as they align on a single goal, they weave together into a thick, golden cord of energy. This, Hill realized, was the mastermind, the coordination of knowledge and effort in a spirit of harmony between two or more people for the attainment of a definite purpose. Hill decided to put his own theory to the test. He didn't have money, but he had a mastermind group. He approached a group of investors not as a beggar, but as a man offering a partnership in the philosophy of success. "I am not asking for a loan," Hill told them, his voice steady, channeling the confidence of the titans he'd interviewed. "I am inviting you to join a mastermind that will organize the very laws of achievement." For the first time, people didn't see a broke reporter. They saw the third mind created by the group's collective belief. The group provided the funding he needed to continue his travels. He had turned a thought into a physical reality, using nothing but a psychological principle. But the lesson wasn't just about cooperation. Hill discovered that a mastermind could also be destructive. If the harmony was broken, if one person brought in negative mental attitude, NMA, the golden cord would turn into a jagged, sparking wire that burned everything it touched. He watched businesses crumble, not because of lack of money, but because the mastermind was poisoned by jealousy and internal strife. The chapter ends with Hill looking into a mirror. In the Pixar style, his reflection ripples. Behind him, he sees the faint, glowing silhouettes of Carnegie, Ford, and Edison. He realizes that even though they aren't in the room, he has formed a virtual mastermind with them. He's never truly alone as long as he carries their principles. He picks up his pen, his eyes glowing with the same burning desire he saw in the furnaces of Detroit. He finally understands. No man can become a permanent success without taking others with him. Hill was finally gaining momentum, but he was about to face the one thing no mastermind could protect him from: the First World War. As the world descended into literal chaos, Hill would have to find a way to keep his burning desire alive while the very foundations of civilization were being blown apart. By 1914, the world was on the brink of a nervous breakdown. As the drums of World War I began to beat in Europe, the optimistic Gilded Age of Carnegie and Ford was evaporating. Napoleon Hill found himself at a crossroads. He had the mastermind group, but the external world was becoming a hurricane of negativity. In our Pixar-style visualization, this chapter is titled The Laboratory of the Soul. The aesthetic shifts to a rich, alchemist's workshop feel. We see Hill in a small office, surrounded by bubbling beakers, not of chemicals, but of ideas. The lighting is a deep, glowing amber, representing the heat required to turn base metal into gold. Hill noticed that thousands of people wished for money, but they were still poor. He realized that a wish is a cold, limp thing. To create results, a wish must be heated until it becomes a burning desire. The animation illustrates this through a transformation sequence. we see a character holding a dull gray stone labeled Hope. As they focus on a definite major purpose, the stone begins to glow. It starts to melt, turning into a liquid molten gold. Desire, Hill writes, is the starting point of all achievement. Not a hope, not a wish, but a keen pulsating desire, which transcends everything else. As the war escalated, Hill began to study a more controversial concept: transmutation. He realized that the human mind has powerful primal energies: fear, anger, and physical attraction. Most people waste these energies through drifting or indulgence. In a cinematic Pixar moment, we see Hill's protagonist being chased by a dark cloud of anxiety, the war news. Instead of running, he stops, opens his mental furnace, and channels that anxious energy into his typewriter. The dark cloud is sucked into the machine and comes out as organized, powerful pages of his manuscript. This is the alchemy of thought, taking the raw, chaotic power of emotion and forcing it into a constructive channel. The chapter takes a dramatic turn when the burning desire to serve leads Hill to the White House. He becomes an advisor to President Woodrow Wilson. Here, Hill sees the ultimate application of his philosophy: national morale. He helps craft messages to keep the American public focused on victory. He realizes that a nation, just like a man, needs a definite major purpose to survive a crisis. If the nation thinks defeat, it will be defeated. The chapter ends with a poignant shot of Hill working by candlelight while the rest of the city is under a blackout drill. He is tired, and the war is draining the world's resources, but his internal furnace is hotter than ever. He realizes he isn't just writing a book. He is creating a mental vaccine for the poverty and fear that will surely follow the war. He looks at his half-finished manuscript. He knows he has at least another decade of research to go, as per his contract with Carnegie. But he no longer feels like a man working for free. He feels like a man who has discovered the secret to mental gold. But with the retention ending, a new set of enemies emerged. Not soldiers in trenches, but ghosts in the mind. Hill was about to identify the 6 specific fears that act as the brakes on human progress. By the 1920s, Napoleon Hill had survived a world war and served as an advisor to President Woodrow Wilson. He was no longer just an observer. He was a master of human psychology. But as he began to teach his philosophy to the masses, he realized that most people weren't failing because they lacked a plan. They were failing because they were haunted. In our Pixar-style cinematic journey, this chapter takes a dark, surrealist turn. We move away from the bright factories and library halls into the catacombs of the mind. The lighting shifts to a flickering ghostly violet and charcoal gray. This is the psychological horror chapter of Hill's life. Hill noticed a recurring pattern in the thousands of people he interviewed. Every person carried a set of invisible chains. He identified these as the 6 basic fears. In the animation, we visualize these as 6 distinct, shadowy ghosts that loom behind every human being, whispering into their ears just as they are about to take a leap of faith. The ghost of poverty, a gaunt, shivering figure that freezes the heart and kills ambition. The ghost of criticism, a multi-headed hydra that mocks every new idea. The ghost of ill health, a heavy, suffocating fog that makes the body feel like lead. The ghost of loss of love, a weeping shadow that creates jealousy and possessiveness. The ghost of old age, a figure holding a broken clock, whispering that it's too late. The ghost of death, the tallest, most silent shadow of all. Hill realized that these ghosts live in the subconscious mind. To illustrate this, the screen transforms into a control room, reminiscent of Inside Out. We see Hill's protagonist standing at the controls of his own mind, but the ghosts are hacking the system, sending negative autosuggestions through the wires. Fear is nothing but a state of mind, Hill realizes, and a state of mind can be controlled. Hill teaches the audience the ultimate weapon: autosuggestion. We see Hill standing in front of a mirror, his shadow being bullied by the ghost of poverty. But as Hill begins to recite his definite major purpose with conviction, his voice becomes a physical wave of golden light. Each word he speaks hits the ghosts like a blast of sun. He explains that the subconscious mind is like a fertile garden. If you don't plant seeds of positive mental attitude, the weeds of fear will grow automatically. You have to flood the engine with faith until there is no room for doubt. As Hill masters his own fears, he looks out over the bustling 1920s economy. He sees a world drunk on success, but built on a foundation of hidden fear. He predicts that when the ghost of poverty finally strikes the nation, only those who have mastered their internal world will survive the external collapse. The chapter ends with Hill standing on a podium, a crowd of thousands looking up at him. The ghosts are still there, hovering in the back of the room, but they are smaller now, transparent and powerless against the light of a man who knows his own mind. Hill had defeated his internal demons, and the world was finally ready for his message. But just as he reached the peak of his fame, the literal sky fell. The 1929 stock market crash was about to turn his 6 ghosts into a national reality, and Hill would have to prove his philosophy could work when the banks were empty. The year is 1929. The roaring 20s have just slammed into a brick wall. In our Pixar-style world, the vibrant neon colors of the Jazz Age literally drain away, leaving a world of high-contrast blacks, whites, and funeral grays. The camera pans across the New York Stock Exchange, once a temple of gold, now a chaotic hive of panic. Napoleon Hill stands on a street corner, watching men in expensive suits beg for bread. The ghost of poverty he identified in the previous chapter has become a national epidemic. Hill himself was not immune. He had built a successful magazine and a school of success, but the crash wiped him out. He lost his home, his income, and for a brief moment, his confidence. In a poignant Pixar sequence, we see Hill sitting in a dark room, his typewriter covered in dust. He looks at the letters from Carnegie, Ford, and Edison. They feel like relics of a dead world. "How can I teach success?" he whispers, "when the world is starving?" But then, Hill remembers the principle of faith. He realizes that a philosophy is only true if it works in the dark. He goes for a long walk, a silent meditation, and he describes hearing a voice from within. It wasn't a ghost. It was what he called infinite intelligence. The animation visualizes this as a crack in the gray sky. A single beam of golden light hits Hill, and he begins to see the depression not as a tragedy, but as a cleansing fire. He realizes that the people who are failing are those who built their lives on the sand of luck and speculation. He needs to give them the rock of a proven system. Hill locks himself away. He begins to synthesize 25 years of research into a single, compact volume. We see a montage of his pen flying across paper, fueled by a burning desire that is no longer about his own wealth, but about the survival of the American spirit. He titles the book, Think and Grow Rich. When he finishes, publishers laugh at him. "People don't have money for bread, Napoleon. Why would they buy a book on how to get rich?" But Hill uses his own mastermind principle. He finds a publisher who is just as hungry as he is. They decide to market the book not as a luxury, but as a manual for survival. They release it in 1937, at the tail end of the Depression. The result was a cultural earthquake. In the Pixar visualization, we see the book passing from hand to hand, from a struggling farmer in Kansas to a factory worker in Detroit. As each person reads it, their world transitions from black and white back into color. The book becomes the spark that reignites the engine of the economy. Hill proves that thought is a physical thing. He shows that even when the banks are closed, the bank of the mind is always open for business. The chapter ends with Hill standing on a stage, holding the first printed copy of the book. He isn't just a reporter anymore. He is the prophet of prosperity. Think and Grow Rich made Hill a legend, but success brought a new, stranger challenge. In a forgotten manuscript, Hill revealed a secret meeting he had with the devil. By 1938, Napoleon Hill was the most famous success coach in the world. Think and Grow Rich was a phenomenon. But privately, Hill was unsettled. He felt he hadn't fully explained why most people fail despite having the tools to succeed. He locked himself in a room and wrote a manuscript so controversial that his own wife, Annie Lou, forbade him from publishing it for fear of the public backlash. In our Pixar-style cinematic, the atmosphere shifts from the triumphant gold of his book launch to a chiaroscuro mystery. The setting is a dimly lit, liminal space, a room that feels like it exists between dimensions. Napoleon Hill sits at his typewriter, but across from him is a massive, shifting shadow. Hill claimed to have used a mastermind technique to summon and interview the devil himself. In our animation, the devil isn't a red creature with a pitchfork. He is a sleek, articulate, and terrifyingly logical entity of smoke and mirrors. "I don't need to buy souls," the devil explains with a smirk. "I just wait for them to give up their power to choose." This is the chapter where Hill introduces the villain of his philosophy, the Drifter. In the animation, we see a drifter, a character with glazed-over eyes, floating down a river of gray fog. A drifter is anyone who stops thinking for themselves, who follows the crowd, and who has no definite major purpose. The devil explains that he owns 98% of the world because they are too lazy to use their own minds. He uses the ghosts of fear from Chapter 7 to paralyze people until they become mental zombies. Hill uncovers the mechanism of entrapment. The devil describes hypnotic rhythm, the idea that any habit, good or bad, eventually becomes permanent. If you drift long enough, the rhythm of the universe locks you into a state of failure. It's like a groove in a record player that you can never escape. The Pixar visual shows the drifter falling into a deep, circular trench that gets deeper with every step. The walls of the trench are made of procrastination, gossip, and doubt. Hill pushes back. He demands to know how to break the rhythm. The devil, forced to tell the truth by Hill's willpower, reveals the 7 principles of freedom: definiteness of purpose, self-discipline, learning from adversity, controlling environmental influence, time, converting habits into permanent positive rhythms, harmony, caution. The chapter ends with Hill finishing the manuscript, titled Outwitting the Devil. He looks at the pages, realizing he has exposed the psychological mechanics of hell. But he also realizes the world of 1938 isn't ready for a book that says the church, the schools, and the government are often tools of the devil to keep people from thinking. He hides the manuscript in a vault. It would remain buried for 73 years, only to be published in 2011. Hill had decoded the dark side of the mind, but he was about to face a scientific mystery he couldn't explain: the brain as a radio. He would soon realize that thoughts aren't just ideas. They are physical signals that travel through the air. By the early 1940s, Napoleon Hill began to move beyond simple psychology and into a realm that sounded like science fiction: the radio theory of the mind. He was fascinated by the work of Guglielmo Marconi and the invention of the radio. He reasoned that if a box of wires could pick up invisible signals from the air, the human brain, the most complex structure in the known universe, must be both a transmitter and a receiver. In our Pixar-style cinematic, we enter the electromagnetic era. The visual style shifts to retrofuturism, where the air is filled with glowing blue pulses and golden waves of energy, invisible to the characters but shimmering for the audience. Hill proposed that every human brain is a broadcasting station for the vibration of thought. He believed that when we think, we aren't just talking to ourselves. We are sending out a frequency that others can pick up on a subconscious level. This, he argued, was the secret behind charisma, influence, and why like attracts like. In the animation, we see Hill sitting in a busy park. Around him, the thoughts of others float like colored smoke: gray for fear, red for anger, and bright, piercing gold for inspiration. Hill identifies 3 parts of this internal technology: the subconscious mind, the power plant. This is the station's energy source. It's where the message is generated and pushed out into the universe. The creative imagination, the receiver. This is the part of the brain that picks up ideas from infinite intelligence or the broadcasts of other people. Autosuggestion, the tuning knob. This is the most important part. It is the tool you use to tune the dial of your brain from the frequency of failure to the frequency of success. The Pixar sequence shows a frustrated inventor trying to solve a puzzle. His radio is currently tuned to static doubt. He begins to use autosuggestion, reciting his goals with conviction. We see the dial turn with effort. Suddenly, the static clears and a golden signal beams down from the sky. This is the aha moment, the flash of genius that Hill argues isn't luck, but a successful connection to the universal broadcast of ideas. Hill also warns of the frequency of failure. He realized that if you hang around negative, complaining people, your receiver will accidentally pick up their broadcasts, dragging your own energy down. We see a character who's motivated, but as they walk through a crowd of drifters, the gray thought smoke begins to clog their own gold signal. This is why Hill insisted on the mastermind, surrounding yourself with people who broadcast on a high frequency. The chapter ends with Hill looking at a massive radio tower against a sunset sky. He realizes that the greatest technology ever created isn't made of steel. It's sitting inside the human skull. Hill had decoded the radio. But there was one more power. A hidden fuel so potent it could drive a man to greatness or lead him to total ruin. It was time to talk about the engine of genius, the mystery of transmutation. Napoleon Hill noticed a strange pattern in his 25 years of research. Almost every titan of industry, from Carnegie to Chrysler, possessed an enormous amount of raw, restless energy. They were high-vibration individuals, but he also noticed that many of them didn't truly hit their stride and achieve greatness until they were over 40 or 50 years old. In our Pixar-style visualization, we look at the fuel tank of the human spirit. The aesthetic is steampunk meets bioenergy. We see a character with a glowing core in their chest, a swirling vortex of red and orange energy. This is raw, primal drive. Hill's discovery was simple. This raw energy is the most powerful force in the human body. If it is wasted on distractions or purely physical impulses, it is like a steam engine venting all its steam into the air. Lots of noise, but no movement. Transmutation is the act of taking that steam and forcing it through a narrow pipe to turn the wheels of a machine. The animation shows a character feeling a surge of restless, nervous energy. Instead of letting it dissipate, they sit down at a piano or a drafting board. As they focus, we see the red-orange energy travel up their spine and turn into brilliant violet and gold light in their brain. Hill argued that genius is simply a person who has learned to stop wasting their internal fuel and instead uses it to supercharge their imagination. This is why many successful people are intensely creative. They are using their primal drive to power their radio receiver from Chapter 10. Hill also observed that many of these men reached their peak only after finding a partner who provided emotional harmony. This goes back to the mastermind. When that raw energy is combined with the spirit of harmony, it becomes a stable, nuclear power source that can sustain a 20-year mission. Hill believed that through this transmutation, a person could step into a sixth sense. It's like an athlete entering the zone by channeling all their internal heat into one single definite purpose. They become unstoppable. They no longer see obstacles. They only see the path. The chapter ends with Hill looking at a lightning bolt in a storm. Lightning is just raw energy hitting the earth. But when that same energy is captured and sent through a wire, it lights up a city. The man who masters his own energy, Hill writes, is the man who can master the world. Chapter. Hill had the retention, the engine, and the fuel. But he was getting old. He needed to ensure this message would survive long after he was gone. He was about to enter the final stage of his life, the law of cosmic Habitforce. By the 1950s, Napoleon Hill was in the winter of his life. But his mind was sharper than ever. He had watched empires rise and fall, and he began to notice a law that governed not just humans, but the entire universe. He realized that everything in nature, from the path of the stars to the way a tree grows, is subject to a fixed rhythm. He called this the law of cosmic habit-force. In our Pixar-style cinematic, we move from the internal radio of the brain to a vast cosmic perspective. The visual style becomes galactic, deep purples, shimmering nebulae, and the literal gears of the universe turning in silent, perfect harmony. Hill's realization was profound. The universe doesn't like chaos. It likes patterns. Once a star finds its orbit, it stays there. Once a river carves a path, it continues to flow. Hill argued that human thoughts and actions do the exact same thing. In the animation, we see a character performing a small, positive action, like writing in a journal. The first time they do it, it's a faint, flickering line in the sand. But as they repeat it, the line turns into a groove, then a trench, and finally, a golden, glowing river. The law of cosmic habit-force is the final boss of Hill's philosophy. It explains that if you repeat a thought or action long enough, the universe eventually takes over and makes it more automatic. Nature, Hill explained, takes over our habits and makes them permanent unless we consciously break them. We see this visualized as a momentum effect. Our protagonist is no longer struggling to push the wheel of success. The wheel is now spinning so fast that it's pulling him along. Success is no longer an effort. It has become his natural orbit. But there is a dark side to this law. Cosmic habit-force doesn't care if your habit is good or bad. If you spend years drifting, complaining, or being afraid, the universe will lock you into that rhythm just as firmly as it locks a planet into orbit. In the film, we see a drifter trying to change their life. They take one step toward a goal, but the gravity of their old grey habits pulls them right back into the trench. This is why most people fail. They try to fight a cosmic law with only a few days of willpower. Hill teaches that the only way to win is to use the law against itself. You must consciously create a new rhythm through self-discipline until the law of cosmic habit-force captures your new behavior. Once that happens, you become unstoppable because the very laws of nature are now working in your favor. The chapter ends with a cinematic shot of an elderly Hill looking up at the night sky. He isn't afraid of the future because he has aligned his habits with the stars. He understands that he is no longer just a man. He is a part of a successful, functioning universe. Chapter, Hill had found the laws of the universe, but he knew his time was running out. In the penultimate chapter, we witness the legacy of the 500. We see how the secret was passed down to the modern titans of the 21st century, and how it almost died with Hill. The 1960s were a time of radical change, and Napoleon Hill was now a legend in his twilight years. He had fulfilled his 20-year contract with Carnegie many times over, but as he sat in his study, he wasn't looking at the past. He was looking at the future. He began to see his philosophy of achievement move from the dusty pages of 1930s books into the very architecture of the modern world. In our Pixar-style cinematic, this chapter is the Legacy Bridge. The visual style transitions from the vintage, hand-drawn look of the early 20th century into a vibrant, high-definition, Silicon Valley aesthetic. We see the golden threads of Hill's principles weaving through the decades, connecting the Steel Age to the Information Age. Hill realized that while the names of the big players had changed, the blueprint remained identical. He watched as new leaders emerged, using his 13 principles to build empires that Carnegie could only have dreamed of. In the animation, we see a montage of the 21st century's most successful figures. While they might use computers instead of typewriters, the software in their brains is the same. We see a modern entrepreneur facing a massive setback, a Pixar-style representation of a dark wall. They don't give up. They use persistence and the mastermind to blast a hole through it. The billion-dollar blueprint was no longer reserved for the elite and marble mansions. Hill's greatest joy was seeing his work in the hands of the common man. We see a cinematic sequence of a small business owner in a quiet town and a student in a crowded city. Both are reading a tattered copy of Think and Grow Rich. As they read, the golden aura of definiteness of purpose begins to glow around them. Hill's legacy wasn't just about making billionaires, it was about giving every human being the keys to their own mental prison. Near the end of his life, Hill met with W. Clement Stone, a man who had used Hill's principles to build a massive insurance empire from scratch. Stone became the guardian of Hill's work. In a touching Pixar-style scene, the elderly Hill hands a glowing golden manuscript to the younger Stone. It represents the collective wisdom of the 500. The secret is only a secret if it's hidden, Hill tells him. Once it's shared, it becomes a law. Hill began to reflect on the fact that he was now one of the silhouettes he used to dream about. He had become a mentor to people he would never meet. He realized that the mastermind doesn't end when a person dies. Every time someone reads his words, they are forming a mastermind with Napoleon Hill himself. The chapter ends with a shot of a modern-day skyscraper. At the very top, in a sleek glass office, a young CEO closes a book. On the cover, in gold letters, is the name Napoleon Hill. Outside the window, the city lights pulse like the radio signals from Chapter 10. The blueprint is alive. Napoleon Hill passed away in 1970, but his story didn't end there. In the final chapter, we reveal the greatest secret of all, the one he saved for the very last page of his life. November 1970. The screen is filled with a soft, ethereal light. A Pixar-style sunset of a century. We see an elderly Napoleon Hill sitting in his favorite chair, the air around him calm and still. He has spent over 60 years answering the question Carnegie posed in that mahogany library. Millions of books have been sold. Countless fortunes have been built. But as the sun dips below the horizon, Hill realizes there is one final piece of the puzzle to share. In this concluding chapter, the visual style shifts from the doing to the being. The gears of the factories and the pulses of the radio towers fade into a singular, clear, and quiet mountaintop. The final revelation is this: the riches Hill spoke of were never the destination. They were the side effect of a transformed character. Hill explains that the seventh sense isn't a superpower. It is the moment a human being stops fighting the universe and starts flowing with it. We see a visual metaphor of a person standing before a massive, heavy door. For 13 chapters, they've been trying to pick the lock, but as the final revelation hits, they realize the door was never locked. It was waiting for them to simply turn the handle with faith. The camera begins to pull back, higher and higher. We see a global network of golden lights, individual people in every country, of every race and background, all connected by the same principles of achievement. This is the ultimate mastermind. Napoleon Hill's physical body fades, turning into a shimmer of golden dust that joins the cosmic Habitforce of the stars. He has become a permanent part of the human broadcast. Narrator: Napoleon Hill spent 20 years researching the secret so you wouldn't have to, but the philosophy is just a map. A map is useless unless you have the courage to walk the path.